We can't
Hmm.
control the wind.
Yeah.
However, if you are a skilled sailor and you have a seaworthy boat and you have trained and learned the winds and how to use the winds to your advantage, you can literally chart a course to anywhere on the planet.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to This Week in No Code. I'm your host, JJ Englert, here with my co-host, David Pal. And this week, we are going to skip the No Code news of the week because we have a very, very special guest that we want to spend the whole episode on. We are featuring and interviewing Nikola, who is a keynote speaker, a futurist, a strategic advisor, a popular blogger, host of the podcast Singularity FM, where they've had over 7 million views on YouTube and iTunes and have been featured on TV networks and media such as the BBC, the Huffington Post. He spent the last 15 years producing over 1,000 articles and interviewing over 300 of the world's best experts, talking about AI, futurism, and so much more. And he also goes by the nickname of Socrates. So, Nikola, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. And could you just tell us a little bit more about who you are?
Thanks, JJ. Well, you can call me Nick for shortness. Basically, I am a technology storyteller, if you will. I'm a keynote speaker, and my mission is to help people understand the pros and cons of technology by breaking down complex technological trends into simple stories that anyone can understand so that people can embrace the future rather than fear it. And perhaps the most important part is to give birth to their own ideas. So if I've done my job well, I would be a Socrates, who, by the way, was a midwife, intellectual midwife, to other people giving birth to their own ideas. So, in a way, my goal with my podcast and my work in the last 15 years has been twofold. One fold is to put forward my thesis, which is technology is not enough. It is necessary, but it is insufficient. And however, I don't put a primacy on my thesis. I use it as a bouncing off point. I use it as a conversation starter so that if I've done my job right, we would set up the intellectual environment, the context within which my audience, in this case your audience, would give birth to their own best ideas.
Interesting. So many questions. Can you also explain a little bit what futurism is? Like, what does that mean to be a futurist?
Well, to be a futurist is basically someone concerned with the future possibility of humanity, let's say. It depends on your context, right? You can be a futurist in the corporate context, in which case you would be interested in the future of an industry or a business.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, we're all futurists in our individual context, where we're concerned with our own career, with our future family life, etc., etc. Or in my case, I tend to look at the sort of the biggest picture, combining and corroborating the technological and other social revolutionary trends of our civilization, and therefore, or thereby, trying to sort of guesstimate the future trajectories of our civilization. Now, the biggest misconception here that we have to address is that futurists don't predict the future. Those are fortune tellers. Futurists basically help you understand the technological trends that are currently happening and the possible future outcomes of those trends. And then they hopefully motivate you to take a proactive stance rather than a reactive stance, because fear is a reaction, but courage is action. So we are futurists are activists in the sense that they try to incentivize, motivate, and inspire you to create the best possible future, whether it's in individual terms as a person for you and your family, whether professionally as a business and an organization, or whether globally as a civilization for our human species, for example.
And how did you get started with this 15 years ago? You had the world's first AI podcast, a podcast focusing on, AI and these topics. Like, 15 years ago, we weren't even thinking about stuff like this. Like, how did this all come to be?
Years ago, I was like playing volleyball after high school. I was like just worried about going to prom.
Well, David, you're an entrepreneur, so you might understand this. And I'm sure many of your audience who have an entrepreneurial background will. And basically, it all started with a failure. I couldn't find a job. So I graduated from my master's degree in 2008 at sort of the peak of the recession.
Yeah.
I sent about 300 resumes and I had one interview, which apparently didn't go very well because they never called me back.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'd be like, the hottest thing on the job market because I came with like 2 degrees. I had all kinds of scholarships and all kinds of intellectual accomplishments, and yet nothing. One of my applications was to the first blog in the world at that time on AI, which was called Singularity Hub. And I thought, I did my master's thesis on AI.
Oh, wow. 15 years
So
ago?
yeah, in 2007. And I had to fight for it, by the way, because my thesis was called Hacking Destiny, Critical Security at the Intersection of Machine and Human Intelligence.
Wow.
And I argued in it that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are not the clash of civilizations, as Samuel Huntington said, and as was the modern kind of intellectual trend in the Department of Political Science of the time. But I argued they're the first time in history when increasingly automated machines are taking increasingly automated decisions as per whether a human being would live or die. And that's the biggest break point in the history, because
And
that's
we're
the
seeing
first
that
time.
now in wars fought by drones and
And so
automated
many other things.
systems.
Yeah.
Yes. The first drones that were used at the time were used in Yemen by the CIA, and they were a bunch of Predator drones that were originally designed for surveillance, but then the CIA strapped a few Hellfire missiles on them and sort of made them work as not only surveillance, but also to access targets of opportunity, as they call them. And so I said that that's the biggest break point, because if you extrapolate that trajectory in the future, then one of many potential scenarios is the Terminator scenario, of course. Anyway,
Wait, you got to
so
tell us a little bit more about the Terminator scenario. Can't just leave us hanging with that one. What is the Terminator scenario where the machines take over the world?
well, yes, and my opinion has evolved greatly for the last 20 years since I've sort of wrote that master's degree thesis.
Sure, of course.
And today I don't believe anymore that the danger comes from the machines. I believe, and we will talk more about that later, but
Yeah.
I believe that AI matters, but character and culture matter more. So they would be the decisive factors or the decisive elements, not the AI. In other words, AI may be the tool, just like nuclear weapons may be the tool by which we destroy ourselves potentially,
Yeah.
but they would not be the reason why we do it.
Yeah.
And the more important thing to address is the why, not the how, right?
Yeah.
And that's a good segue point, by the way. Technology is a tool.
Yeah.
So it's very important to put it in context. It's not the end itself. It's simply a means to an end. So technology in ancient Greece originates from 2 words, techne and logos. Techne means art, craft, or skill. And logos means discourse or a conversation about how things are done, how things are accomplished. So in other words, technology means a conversation about who accomplish things, about how you do things, about how you get things done, about how you get what you want. That's what technology is all about, right? So in other words, before you look for the how of something, you have to start with the why you want to do something, why you want to get something, right? And so only after you figured out your why is it useful and handy to figure out, okay, now I got my why, what's the best how, the easiest, the most efficient, the cheapest, the fastest way I can accomplish my goal, right? So
It's
the why
interesting.
comes first, the how comes second.
This is interesting. Just thinking about our agency work and how lots of the time clients come to us, I want to build an app, right? And a lot of the time we end up going and saying, well, yeah, but why? Like, what are you solving? What's the problem you're doing? Who's using it? What do they need to do? What's their like day in the life kind of work? The jobs to be done scenario is a better framework to start building products than just I can see a screen in my head with no real usage for it. I want this, right? Instead of thinking the why. And so it's interesting how it really does kind of manifest itself there
It
first.
doesn't matter if you're a business, an individual, an
Hmm.
organization, a corporation, or even a nation in a civilization. If you haven't figured out your why, you'd be scattered. If you don't know where you're going, no wind is favorable, you know?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
and futurism is precisely about that. Futurism is going back to the previous question. Futurism is about creating or imagining all the kinds of possible futures that are possible from the cones of possibilities of your current present, and then deciding which ones are your preferable futures, which one is your most favorite future, and then reverse engineering to the present backwards from that future and asking yourself, okay, what kind of action? That's why I said futurism is activist. It's not passive. It's not like, oh, I'm going to read your palm and that's the future and it's written in stone. And, you're going to
Sure.
marry the princess and you're going to live happily ever after. It doesn't work like that, right? Futurism is an activism, which means you have to figure out where you want to go and then reverse engineer all the steps that will take you there, right? And that's what it's all about. It's kind of like when you're a skilled sailor, right? So there are things that we control and there's things that we don't control. We cannot control the wind, right? We can't
Hmm.
control the wind.
Yeah.
However, if you are a skilled sailor and you have a seaworthy boat and you have trained and learned the winds and how to use the winds to your advantage, you can literally chart a course to anywhere on the planet. Even though you can't control the wind, the only thing you can control is the sail.
Hmm.
But based on your skill set, and you can go anywhere in any direction, right? This is what futurism is about. There are certain kind of global trends that are, some of them we have control over, some of them we don't. Some of them we have a lot control over, some of them we have very little. But then it's about combining all those trends together and figuring out which ones we can steer and direct and which ones we can ride to get to the destination of our choice.
Yeah.
In this kind of bigger scheme of AI, and we could talk about the future of AI. We could talk about AGI at some point as well. But currently, where we're sitting now, for the average person listening, we're not in a position to steer the rudder of what AI does, right? Like it feels as if that like we can't say, "Hey, I'm gonna change OpenAI's models so that it's different," right? I can use it, I can ride the wave, like you say, right? The barnacle on a whale kind of thing, right? I can ride the ship and build a life for me, like my future based on what they're doing. But how do I, as like an individual builder, inform what happens with the next few years of AI?
In many ways. In many ways. So I told you a few minutes ago that AI matters, but character and culture matter more.
Hmm.
Okay, so let me unpack this because that's kind of like a strong statement and it's kind of a vague perhaps or hard to understand. So let me unpack it. So first of all, in ancient Greece, the Stoics had this kind of a proverb which said, character is fate. In other words, they said you don't have to be a futurist to predict someone's future. All you have to do is look at their character.
Hmm.
And then you can extrapolate and predict their future, whether they would destroy themselves or whether they would accomplish something great, whether they would serve others or whether they would try to acquire for themselves. All of their future actions stem from their character. Well, character taken at the collective level is culture,
Hmm. Right.
right? When you have a
The
team of
community.
people
Yeah.
or a group of people, and let's talk about, let's put it another way even. What is culture? What is a team? What is a corporation? What are you guys, the three of you? It's basically people who gravitate around a single story. That's how you make a team, right? You
Hmm.
have a story of what you guys want to accomplish.
Hmm.
And around that story, you have a few people. And you can create a startup, you can create a non governmental organization, you can create a not for profit, you can create a movement, you can create a political party, you can create a revolution, right? As long as many other people subscribe to your story. And what does the story do? The story tells you what's the goal,
Hmm.
what's the direction, the most important thing, right? What's the why? It tells you the purpose. But not only that, it tells you what is right and what is wrong. What's the game you're playing? What are the rules of the game? What is
Yeah.
allowed and what is not allowed? In other words, there's a lot of baggage that comes with that. And that creates the culture. And within that culture, so you have that kind of a consensus on all of those things, right? Now, how does AI happen? AI happens in two ways. First, at the individual level, and second, at the collective level. So, individually, AI is invented. The algorithms, all the breakthroughs are done by individual people. Those people tend to exhibit specific characters. And you would find that people of a certain character tend to produce certain kinds of results as in opposition to other kind of people. So
Hmm.
personal character matters a lot. And whether you would choose to create, let's say, AI that allows a drone targeting, or you would create AI that serves, I don't know, medical analysis for cancer or something like that, stems from your values, stems from
Right.
your characters. The object recognition that you would teach and the algorithms may be very similar, but the application is very different because it stems
Hmm.
from the purpose. Now, when you extrapolate that to the collective level, that's where we're talking about the culture. And in other words, what we're saying here is that AI doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is invented and designed by certain people with certain character and within a certain cultural context. And
Hmm.
that cultural context deciphers or determines what is right and what is wrong, what is allowed and what is not allowed, what is good and what is bad. It comes loaded with values,
Yeah.
and you can't avoid that, right? And so AI matters just like nuclear weapons matter, just like nuclear energy matters, just like solar, everything, all those advanced technology matter a lot. But the character and the culture within which they're being born matter more, because the AI is again just the how. The
Hmm.
why doesn't come from the AI. The AI doesn't have a why. The AI is only the how. The why comes from the character of the designers and inventors and the entrepreneurs and the founders and the culture within which it comes to be. So, going back to your question, how do you make a difference? Well, in two ways. You can make a difference as a consumer by choosing or not choosing to buy or use a certain product, right? So, for
Sure.
example, I'm a keynote speaker. I have decided I will never, ever in my life use Google Ads, ever, or even worse, Facebook ads. I will
Hmm.
never use ads. Do they work? You betcha. They
Yeah.
work. Can I benefit from them? You betcha. Would
Yeah.
my business be stronger from them? You betcha. But those private benefits would come in my value system at the expense of the cultural collective. And to me, those values overrule my personal benefits. And so I have decided I will spread the word about my speaking services in different ways, and most importantly by word of mouth,
Hmm.
because those are the best kind of testimonials
Hmm.
rather than pay for ads.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Because I think that the ad system comes with certain kind of baggage, which I don't appreciate the end result of,
Hmm.
and therefore I choose not to support it. Furthermore, you can create also political pressure for certain kinds of changes. You can, if you work in tech, for example, today people who work in tech are the most powerful people in the world at many levels. And we've seen many times, for example, there was kind of a, I don't want to call it corporal rebellion, but it was in a way a corporate, you know, uprising or pushing back on Microsoft and Google creating targeting drone targeting software
Yeah.
for the US Pentagon, right? People said we don't want to work on tasks like that,
Hmm.
right?
Well,
So
that is actually why, at least the lore of it, Elon Elon Musk, one of the early supporters of OpenAI, didn't trust Eric Schmidt, the then CEO of Google, what he would do with AI, and so he wanted to build a nonprofit OpenAI. That's what he started to give a balance to this power. Whether or not this is true, I see you're kind of maybe shaking your head if what that happens, but that's the lore of he didn't trust his value system. He didn't trust Eric Schmidt's value system to be proactive and support, everything that Elon values, right? So his contribution was the balance of power. But yeah, you're right. People do protest and people do walk and speak loudly with their wallets. That seems to be the most common in any, whether it's AI or any other mission, right? Either promoting or stepping away from, I think people were boycotting Starbucks for a while for some other
and again, not only
issue.
as a consumer but also as a designer and as a participator in the tech industry, right? Your audience, from what I understand, is very highly technologically sophisticated people.
Hmm.
Every one of them has to make decisions in their life and in their career. What do I want to work for? And it helps to ask yourself those goals. Why do I do what I want to do? Well, you say, well, I want to pay my mortgage and I want to, send my kids to school. Okay, fine. But I can respect that. But beyond that, do you have any other greater goal to make a difference in the world? If you do, or to prevent certain kind of bad outcomes in the world, and if you do, is there a greater goal? In other words, are you just trying to sort of pay your kids' education and pay your mortgage, or are you trying to accomplish something greater? And if you can find that for yourself, then you would find that it's very much easier to make decisions on certain offers or on certain opportunities and possibilities,
Yeah.
because that will be like your north star.
Hmm.
That will be like your compass, and it will set you up when you're in a dilemma and you don't know which way to go. Just ask yourself, which one is going to take me closer to my goal? And then it's easy to decide. That's why it's always great to start with the question why.
Yeah. Let me piggyback on the values, the ethics here, get into accountability a little bit. I think we're seeing this with Gemini and Copilot with Google's latest stuff of, these LLMs having really negative messaging to some people of people, saying, hey, should I commit suicide? And the LLMs saying, maybe you should, and things like that. So like the accountability of AI and building these LLMs? Like, where do you see it, and who should be held responsible for AI systems that could cause harm or errors like this?
So this actually brings us back to the point I made before, why AI matters but character and culture matter more, right? So how does AI work? Okay, you just mentioned the LLMs. Well, LLMs cannot work without data,
Right.
lots of it. What's data? Another word for data is culture, right? Because our culture produces tremendous amounts of data. And then based on those data points, the AIs get trained. And if they don't get trained, they don't work, right?
Hmm.
So that's why the culture matters more than the AI, because the AI learns from the culture, but it goes
Right.
even beyond that, right? So you're going to say, well, our culture is imperfect as it is, and it has many, many, many flaws,
Hmm.
and the data is sometimes contaminated itself. There may be problems with the data. It may not even reflect the culture, or it may reflect the culture but not in a sort of a desirable direction, or with desirable
Right.
examples. In other words, we don't want to underline the flaws of our culture, but we want to diminish them and their impact on the training of AI. So how do we do that? Well, we do that with the next step, which is reinforced learning. And what is reinforced learning? Well, reinforced learning is basically a culture, a certain kind of cultural values, which kind of a group of people who do the reinforced learning try to reinforce upon the AI with the hope of aligning it with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say, well, so that's why again the people and their values are more important than the AI because it again gets trained by them. Now, that's a double-edged sword, just like with the culture, the same with the people. I don't know, I'm sure you've seen the news in the last couple of weeks. One of the big thing has been with Gemini, former
Right.
Bard,
Yeah.
who came up with this kind of culturally diverse Nazi images,
Yeah.
right? So this is kind of like woke culture crossed over in the engineering,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a very difficult problem to deal with, but it's kind of inevitable, and we have to deal with it, because if we don't deal with those hard issues, the technological sort of solutions are just details that don't matter. What matters in the end are those big cultural issues which set the why, right? Because the claim comes that AI is going to bring us towards progress. But what is progress? Progress simply means from Latin going forward. But how can we go forward if we don't know the direction we're going towards, right?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, to go forward, you have to have a direction, you have to have an ultimate goal, you have to have a reason why. And so, unless and until we come together with that why, that's commonly accepted and mutually acceptable, and we don't resolve the cultural problems, even if we resolve the technical problems, they're only going to hurt and make the cultural wars worse and more dangerous than before.
Because in the same way, so this reinforced learning for those, and there are many techniques for how this works. Usually there's train some data, get some output. A human scores the output, says, hey, how did this do? It gets 1 out of 10, 3 out of 10, 5 out of 10. There are people reading these things. The system then learns to benefit in move in a certain direction. It kind of, oh, go ahead.
But
What do
that
you got?
means that that person is kind of smuggling their values, and
Right.
there's
Right.
nothing
And
wrong with that,
that's the
but
point.
you
Yeah.
have to be specific and clear, right? And in most cases, people who do that, or companies and organizations that do that, are very unclear about their own values.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
And
that's part
and
of the reason, because
and
those people are usually engineers. And there's nothing wrong with engineers or designers or and so on and so on. But you have to clarify your ethical or value statements, and if you are going to reinforce them into a machine, because if you're not clear for yourself, you cannot clarify those for a machine.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to clarify those is by going into ethics and by studying ethics. So there's a lot of, tech ethics nowadays, and, I don't know, blockchain ethics and startup ethics and designer ethics and, you know, all kinds of ethics. But in the end of the day, it's bullshit ethics,
Mm-hmm.
because there's only ethics and bullshit ethics. There's no in between. In other words, you can't be someone who studied engineering and design for 20 years and then you suddenly become ethicist. It doesn't work like that. Just like you can't be an ethicist and become an engineer or designer overnight.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go into the field and look at the underlying framework outside of the context, the technological context that you're trying to smuggle it in, because the ethical framework is supposed to be independent of the context. And once you clarify it independently, only then you can take it and apply it to specific context and decide what is to be incentivized and what is to be disincentivized, what is to be promoted and what is to be deleted, right? And
so
so you have to
yeah,
get clear on the ethics.
if you're trying, as some of these big models are trying to learn and reinforce information, of course they're using companies like Scale AI to recruit panels of people to be able to do this. How do you promote, hey, we want a diverse, in basically every direction of diversity, group of people, rich people and poor people, and you know white people and people of color, and men and women, and people who are unsavory and people who are like good intentioned? How do you specifically ask for some of these like maybe nefarious people to somehow participate to understand what our culture really is in
Oh,
building these
it
models?
is a very hard and difficult process,
Hmm.
but it's unavoidable. Just like democracy, it is a very hard and messy and kind of inconsistent and surprising and frustrating system, but it's the worst form of government, save everything else that we've invented so far,
Hmm.
Hmm.
right? So it is imperfect for an imperfect world, but that's what our culture is. It's a collection of diverse point of views, and the key is to allow the peaceful cohabitation or coexistence of diverse and sometimes, to a certain degree, even mutually exclusive ideas, right?
Hmm.
This is the kind of a system. And also, by the way, in this way, you're spreading your risk, you're diversifying your portfolio, if you will, in terms of survivability, right? That's what evolution does. Evolution throws everything at the wall, and
Hmm.
some will stick and some will not. And then those that go extinct, they go extinct, but there's always life that keeps going in all kinds of diverse trajectories and directions and forms and shapes. And the same with culture, right? And one of the dangers of AI is homogenization. That homogeneity that happens with AI is a danger to our survival as a species, in a way, because it disincentivizes diversity and it promotes unification, right? And so how do you keep that diversity? Well, again, it's very hard, it's very messy, and you can't, the tricky part, what's even worse is that, just like in politics, you cannot give all possible views the same weight. It's very hard, right? But
Hmm.
there are certain traits that you must favor over others. For example, one of them is safety, right? You
Yeah.
have to put safety above other considerations, right?
Hmm.
So then you have to define those, and then you can sort of create a hierarchy of goals, right? Based on your value system and based on, like, sort of how profound the effect of a mistake will be, right? So if it comes to safety with AI, obviously you don't want to take that kind of a risk,
Hmm.
right? Because
Hmm.
it could be fundamentally disastrous, not only to a nation, but maybe potentially to, our whole species, right?
Hmm.
And so you have to have this hierarchy of values, and that's what ethics is all about,
Yeah.
right? And how do you do it? By incentivizing conversations, not echo chambers, right? Conversations between different points of views, different kinds of people, different kinds of backgrounds, in different kind of languages, in different kinds of forums, among different members, about technically sophisticated and technically unsophisticated people, about the left and the right, containing all kinds of religions and all kinds of people. It's very hard, very messy, and very slow. But all cultural change is very hard, very slow, and very messy.
Hmm.
But that's the only way you can make, unfortunately, a long-term change. That's why I said character and culture matter more. And AI breakthroughs come very quickly. Cultural breakthroughs are much harder and take much longer time. That's part of the issue here, right? That's what makes this moment for our civilization also so dangerous.
Well, let's talk about regulation on all of this. It's you think about OpenAI and Google, like, are they being regulated in any way? I don't think they are. They're the people at their own company making their own decisions with their own ethics and culture about how these LLMs should react. But where should regulation come in here? Like, we want AI to be advanced, but we also need to do it in a safe way. So, from a government standpoint and an international body standpoint, how should we think about regulations with AI in your point of view?
I wish I have the easy answers for you guys, but it's a struggle. So with OpenAI, for example, one kind of regulation that unfortunately is kind of falling apart as we speak was self-regulation. And that's generally what the tech industry has been pushing for, historically speaking.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
their comment. Hey,
Uh,
we'll do it. Trust us.
right. And OpenAI was a not-for-profit organization originally, but of course now it's very far from that. And part of its charter was the idea that its sort of AI cannot be used for military purposes, for example, among many other things. And even recently, one of the most recent developments after that whole kind of debacle with the CEO being
Yeah, the
fired and then
shakeup.
being
Yeah.
rehired and all of it, one of the things that changed was that now that rule has been removed.
Mhm.
Right? In other words, we had the kind of idealistic, romantic view, if you will, of what OpenAI is here to do and how it will do it and what it will not be willing to do. And then we had the commercial kind of a view about what OpenAI is here for. And if you look at that clash that happened, was very kind of telling, because it was kind of a clash between romanticism or idealism and sort of commercial interest. And literally in 4 or 5 days, I think it was 5 days
Yeah,
maybe,
it was quick.
the commercial interests took
One.
over and won absolutely decisive victory.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And there was a huge change. And as soon as that happened, some of the rules even started changing. And so today's OpenAI is very far off from the original sort of OpenAI as it was supposed to be. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the first problem. The first problem, and the best way always to make a change, is at the personal level, at the kind of individual ethics or character level. Now, if that fails, and that fails very often, right? We can't expect everyone will be ethical and everyone will do the right thing at the right time for the right
Mm-hmm.
reasons. And it takes a long time to train people to even think like that. It starts from, very young education. It takes 20 or 30 years, if not a lifetime, for people to even have that kind of a mindset. It's very complicated and slow process. So when that fails, and it does fail, then you need to have the regulatory framework to regulate, and even more so prosecute and
Mm-hmm.
punish offenders. And that prosecution has to be pretty strong in financial terms. And so going back to JJ's question about responsibility, who is responsible? Well, right now, still, until the AI becomes AGI, we are responsible. We are on the hook,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I have a saying that goes like this. So people have this myth that technology is a crystal ball.
Mhm.
And based on that kind of myth that technology is a crystal ball, they believe that if you can look at technology, you can see the future. You can
Mm-hmm.
kind of predict the future. But that's wrong. Technology is not a crystal ball. Technology is a magnifying mirror, because it only points back to us. It reflects the best of us and the worst of us. It reflects our dreams and it reflects our fears. It reflects, everything, our hopes and dreams, and it reflects our nightmares. It reflects our good and it reflects our evil. So if you want to see the future, and you look at technology, you're only going to see the image of humanity in it,
Mhm.
because we are the ones creating that technology. So when you're saying, okay, let's improve the technology, it's like saying, okay, let's polish the mirror. Okay, you can polish the mirror as much as you want. If you don't like the image that you see, most of the time and effort must be spent on you yourself, because you are the image emitter. You project the image into the mirror of technology, and technology just magnifies that and makes it infinitely more powerful and overwhelming than it's originally is, because it has this kind of exponential effect, right? It takes it exponential. So if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. The only thing is that this time the garbage is exponential. It is not the same garbage. It's like literally overwhelming. But you can't complain that it's the mirror. You have to face the reality that it is you. And so you have to start fixing yourself more than the mirror. And that's why when you have that kind of investment, we're now talking about hundreds of billions, probably trillions of dollars worth of investment in AI. We must have parallel and equal kinds of investment in human intelligence, right? Because
Hmm.
the danger doesn't come from the AI. The danger, so what is AI? Artificial intelligence. The danger doesn't come from the artificial, it comes from the intelligence part. But the intelligence part so far, it's us. We are the intelligence
Mm-hmm.
because we create the algorithms and we create the value structure and the goal system that the AI is using.
Mm-hmm.
We're giving them the data. We're telling them what's right and what's wrong. We're telling them what's their purpose and their meaning. We're doing everything for them. They don't have any of that load or baggage that we do. So we have to invest in parallel terms in the human intelligence. And failing to do that only means you're going to get the problem worse, not better. Because all current problems of our civilization are one and the same problem that sort of plays itself out in different realms. It's not global warming, it's not toxic or plastic pollution. It's not ocean acidification. It's not nuclear or chemical weapons. It's not pandemics. It's not the danger of AI. All those things are exactly the same thing that plays itself out over and over again. And that is our technological power far outpacing and outstripping our wisdom, our own wisdom, and our own ability to utilize it in a safe, peaceful, productive, non destructive, non self destructive manner.
Yeah.
So, unless and until we figure out that problem, the more powerful technology that we use, the more that gap is going to grow, and therefore the worse it's going to become. Because the essence of the problem is not the power that technology gives us. Technology just magnifies us, our power. The essence is the garbage, whatever we decide to put in.
Yeah.
That's
Do
the
you
essence.
do you
That's
have
the
any?
problem.
You
Yeah.
you mentioned we're spending trillions of dollars in the AI technology, but we should spend time and money on the wisdom. What's a tangible step someone can do, or the government or an investor, or like how do we increase that investment in human wisdom?
Well, so again, it's a cultural project, and it's the biggest project of our civilization. Okay,
Mhm.
people think, oh, AI is the biggest project of our civilization, or going to the moon is the biggest project of our civilization, or achieving immortality is the biggest project of our civilization. No, all of those are means to an end. They're house. The biggest project of our civilization is humanity. We are the biggest project of our civilization,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we might as well invest in ourselves. So how do we do that? Well, I am a big proponent of investing in the arts and investing in ethics and in philosophical training. That's not to underplay and undermine the importance of science and technology, but and STEM is kind of like very important, and it's been like sort of the slogan under which we're supposed to gather and get direction in terms of our investment. But actually, it's not STEM, it's STEAM, because the arts have
Mhm.
to be right in the heart of all those sciences. Because what does science do? Science makes our life better, easier, more comfortable, and safer. It doesn't tell us what's the good life. It doesn't tell us what to live for. It doesn't tell us what to use our life for. It doesn't tell us anything that matters, right? It's like building a bridge. Science builds a bridge from here to there, from the present into the future. But if you don't know where that bridge is going to take you, for what purpose, for what reason, it's all in vain and maybe even self destructive, right? So, right in the middle of STEM, you need to have STEAM, arts. And that means not only arts, but also philosophy and the so called soft sciences, right?
Mhm.
Literature, all the soft, because they make life worth living. They tell you why you should be living in the first place. They tell you what's the good life. They tell you what's right and what's wrong. They tell you, and and they're very complex and very complicated. And that's where the future of humanity, by the way, may lie. Because take, for example, programming. Programming may be out of the human future within 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, today,
So what is
many
everyone going
people,
to do? Arts.
sorry?
Then, if they're not programming, they need to do something else.
Exactly. And so the AIs can bring the skills and the means, the technological means towards our goals, but we need to get our goals straight. We need to set our values straight, and the only way we can do that is with the arts and with philosophy and things like that, and social science, the so-called soft sciences, which were, by the way, kind of abandoned for the last few decades, if not ever.
Let's stay on future here as we maybe have 10 to 15 more minutes left. Let's talk about where the future is going and where we maybe even make some forecast predictions of what we see. I think AGI being part of that future. You kind of forecasted 5 to 10 years. Maybe programming isn't even a thing. Where let's just talk about AGI to begin with. Like, what do you think will come with AGI for the better or the worse?
So again, I'm not worried about AGI. We have met the enemy, and the enemy is us.
Hmm.
The greatest danger to humanity is not Terminators, it's not the rise of the machines, it's not artificial intelligence, it's human stupidity.
Yeah.
That's the greatest danger to humanity, okay? So what worries me is, I don't know if are you guys fan of Dune, by the way?
Dune the movie.
Well,
The
the
book
book
first.
originally, but
The book
The
first.
book, yeah, I love the movie.
yeah, the movie is a pale reflection of the book. But anyway, so before, so in a very small part at the beginning of the movie, kind of setting up the context of a world in which Dune exists, that kind of a universe.
Hmm.
Frank Herbert talks about there were those people who wanted to solve all their problems by turning over their thinking to machines who were supposedly going to solve all their problems, only to find themselves enslaved to other people who are running those machines.
Hmm.
And that's when you had the so-called Butlerian revolution,
Hmm.
which then ended up destroying all the machines and kind of banning AI. And that's why you have the mentats afterwards, who were kind of like the human version of AI, if you will. But anyway, so I'm not concerned about the AGI. I'm concerned about the people who are going to create it, the context within which it's going to be created, because they set the goal structure
Hmm.
and the the means, what is allowed and what is not allowed, what is good and what is bad. And that's what's the problem. It's the AI is not the problem. And so I am personally not worried about AGI. I'm worried about human stupidity. And there's a number of future scenario where we may not even make it to the birth of AGI, because we may be so stupid as to destroy ourselves even before we
Before
get there.
that.
And by the way, it's a strong possibility that AGI may happen within the next, let's say, 20 years potentially.
You think that
Uh,
long?
yeah, yeah, because we're still not quite to the AGI level. I mean, AI can do some incredible stuff,
Yeah.
but for example, when it comes to consciousness, we haven't seen much progress. And to get AGI from AI, perhaps, because the only example of kind of general intelligence or somewhat general intelligence that we have so far is us. And somehow we have to notice that, and many people would disagree with me on that, but we have both consciousness and intelligence.
Hmm.
And perhaps now people would say that's an emergent phenomenon, that's a whole other debate, but at the very least we have to notice that they happen together in the only example that we know of so far in the universe. So consciousness, if consciousness is a requirement for AGI to be present, so far we've made a lot of progress on the intelligence end of things. We haven't made any progress on the consciousness end of things, right?
Mhm.
One. And number two is there's still a number of issues that could arise. Number three is the goal structure has to be self-emergent. In other words, a human being has a drive as a result of evolution, right? Which kind of makes us operate and push forward and find one goal after another. And, that's why Edward Hillary, who climbed Everest, said, I got to the top of the mountain, I saw only another mountain, a higher mountain, and started charting, a course to getting there. Well, AI can't do that. AI gets the job done, and then it's over, right? There is no purpose for it to move to another goal, to continue existing, and so on and so on, because it doesn't have an evolutionary drive. So we need those things to come together for AGI to actually exist. So it may, and actually there's a possibility that it may never happen. Who knows? I'm not a skeptic that it's impossible, but I would say the possibilities are anywhere from 5-10 years to hundreds of years. So we may actually be stupid enough to destroy ourselves. If you look at what's happening in the world, in Ukraine,
Right.
it's the greatest confrontation between NATO and Russia, nuclear armed powers who have the power to destroy our civilization several times over. Look at what's happening in Israel and Palestine, right? You have this kind of cultural clash, all kinds of polarization. Look at what's happening in the cultural wars in the United States, right? And that's not unique. It's happening in Brazil, it's happening in Europe, it's happening all over the world, right? And that's why I say that the greatest challenge is not mastering AI. The greatest challenge that we're facing today, it's not climate change, it's not nuclear weapons, it's mastering ourselves, right? We need to win the conflict within us, both as individuals, but also as a culture. That's why I said that character, the fights to make us better people, is called character. That's the fight to make ourselves better, to self-improve ourselves. But the fight to make ourselves better as a collective is the culture, right? And that's why we need to win the conflict within our characters individually and within our cultures collectively. This is our greatest challenge. And this is what will destroy humanity or help us, go to Mars and populate the universe and spread throughout the cosmos. It wouldn't be the AI. The AI may be the tool or the means, it would not be the reason.
I want to ask one more question, and then I think we're bumping up against time. If you look out into the future, all of the cones of possibility, everything possible, some are more outlandish than others, some are further away, some are closer. What is the one thing out of all of these possibilities you are most excited about? Like that AI can bring into the world?
I don't give a shit about AI. Okay?
All right, well, on that.
In my value system, my goal is not to advance technology like AI. My goal is to advance humanity. Let's not forget that. So if you're asking about AI, you're putting the cart in front of the horse. AI, in theory, is supposed to serve us. We are supposed to be the master, and AI is supposed to be the servant. Unfortunately, the danger is this may flip around. And one way it could flip around is by pure omission of that as a possibility. That's why I'm sorry I jumped like that, David, but we have to be cognizant about what comes first and what comes second, right? So we want to advance humanity, not AI. And only then you can advance AI to the extent that it is advancing rather than diminishing humanity, right? So for me, the most exciting thing of the future and of the present actually is that we live in a world where you matter, where you can make, either by commission or by omission, you can make a difference. So what you do or what you fail to do can change the world. We are all super powerful, and tech people have never been more powerful than they are today. Tech people can make the biggest difference in the world today, probably, because they are sort of in the kitchen where we're collectively and individually cooking or preparing the future of humanity. So their influence on that future is disproportionate.
Sure.
Now, that makes me super excited because that means you and I and me, everyone can make a difference. The scary part is that we can also fuck it up.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's why I say that I'm not scared about AI, but I'm scared about human
Yeah,
stupidity.
I agree with
But it
I
is
agree
up
with
to
that
us.
part of it. Yeah, I agree. Well, this has been an
Whew.
enlightening interview. I wish we had more time to keep diving into all of the other things that you're interested in as well. I also love some nanotechnology and some of that, and so some other time we'll have to chat about that. Anything
But
else
yeah,
before we
I
go?
just say until then, Nicola, where can people find more information about you? Should they want to subscribe to more of your theories, philosophies, interviews that you've had with other experts in these areas?
Well, they can check out my podcast at Singularity FM, singularity.fm, or they can go to singularity.info.
Okay,
Okay, great. We'll link
fantastic.
them in the bio in the show notes. Make sure everyone can find you.
Otherwise, thank you for taking the time. It was a pleasure speaking to you. And for our audience out there, if this didn't get your mind going, I don't know what will, but hopefully it's for the better. Remember, we have the power to make the change, not AI. We have that power. And so I'm jazzed up. I'm ready to go. I hope the same for you all. So we will see you next week on This Week in No Code.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
See you.
Thank you guys. It's been a pleasure.